Welcome back again to Last Week I Watched. I'm Mark and I watch and review movies and TV shows to help you decide whether or not they're worth your time. So this week I'd like to talk about Gretel and Hansel, Sputnik, Bad Samaritan, Life, Gringo, and the Protege. So let's talk about them. First up is Gretel and Hansel. It's from 2020. It stars Sophia Lillis, Samuel Leakey and Alice Krige, and it was showing on Prime. So this is about a young girl. She leads her little brother into the dark woods in desperate search of food and shelter, only to stumble upon a terrifying force of evil. So this is a film adaptation of the well-known Grimm's fairy tale. It's usually known as Hansel and Gretel, but this time it's been flipped around as the story focuses more heavily on Gretel and how she's being held back by having to care for Hansel. Otherwise the story is pretty much the same. Interestingly, it spends a bit of time showing Hulda, played by Alice Krige. She's the witch, and it sort of shows her backstory and where she's sort of come from. And it seems to imply that by gaining supernatural powers, it eventually leads to you being corrupted by them. So Gretel might possibly fall into darkness ultimately. Because it's an adaptation of a well-known fairy tale though, it doesn't surprise you story-wise. You pretty much know ultimately where it's going, and but the magic I think with it is really in the atmosphere and the production design of the film. The film looks great, the forest looks eerie and magical, there's lots of mist, there's lots of shadow and darkness. The witch's house in this though isn't made of candy, but while it's full of sort of luxurious food, it does seem sinister and hints at the horrors that are inside. Sophia does a great job as Gretel, and Alice Krige as always is terrifying. She's sort of channeling her Borg queen into the sort of terrifying witch. She's, you know, sort of pasty and strange looking and has these weird black fingers. And of course the witch's ultimate downfall is horrible. Overall, I think it's an interesting adaptation, but if you're familiar with the story, then there really isn't anything that new there. It's not particularly scary, so it's not going to satisfy horror aficionados necessarily, but it's got some great atmosphere, and I think it's, I guess, an interesting angle that they've kind of turned the witch, I guess, into a mentor and Gretel is a protege, so I suppose that's something a little bit different, but it's definitely the stylings of the film is where it's at. It's very sumptuous to look at, but perhaps there's just not enough story to fill in its runtime. If you're interested in a good looking fairy tale though, check it out. Okay, next up is Sputnik. It's from 2020. It stars Oksana Akinshina, Fedor Bondarchuk and Pyotr Fyodorov. Apologies if I mangled your names. And this one was showing on Prime. So this is about the lone survivor of a Russian spaceship, and he hasn't returned home alone. Hiding inside his body is a dangerous creature. I was really interested in this when I saw it because you don't often see Russian movies, and I was curious what it would be like. Also, it's interesting to listen to Russian since it's not a language I would commonly hear. The film was surprisingly good though, and it had some really good special effects and some good looking sets. The actors do a good job, and the film looked as good as I think anything else that you could see from the West. I liked that it had what we'd probably consider Russian tropes though, but are more likely representations of their culture. It's quite bleak, everything's very functional, more than attractive, and the people in the film aren't just dealing with the alien, but fighting against a do-as-we-say regime / bureaucracy. They're not interested in discussion or teamwork, it's do what we say or else. The creature I think is also really good. I like the way it's essentially wearing the astronaut as its very own spacesuit. Of course it's morally conflicting though, because the symbiotic alien helps keep the astronaut well, but it's consuming prisoners to do it. And there's some sort of slight horror around the creature, but it mostly focuses largely on the two lead characters and their relationship. Tatiana tries to help Konstantin survive and to remove the alien without harming him, and this brings her into direct conflict with the military, who want it for other uses of course. It's interesting that it doesn't descend into an alien killing everyone on the base a la Alien or Predator or sort of any of those other things in the genre. It leans more into the drama rather than horror. And I thought it was a good science fiction movie. It has an interesting Russian flavour. It's definitely worth a look. Check it out. Okay, next up is Bad Samaritan. It's from 2018. It stars David Tennant, Robert Sheehan and Kerry Condon, and it's showing on Prime. So this is about a pair of burglars. They stumble upon a captive woman in a home they are intending to rob. This is very much a case of bad versus worse, with Sean, played by Robert Sheehan, and Derek accidentally becoming entangled with Cale, played by David Tennant, after they attempt to burgle his house and they stumble upon this captive woman locked up in a secret room. Unfortunately, he's a serial killer, and when Sean attempts to rescue his captive, they find themselves on Cale's hit list. Cale takes particular delight in breaking down people, so he goes to work on Sean and Derek's lives, including having their parents fired from their jobs. David Tennant does a great job as the serial killer. He's appropriately menacing, he chews the scenery with relish. I don't know whether or not he got this gig because of his performance as Kilgrave and Jessica Jones, but he's clearly honed that serial killer attitude. He's probably the best thing I think in the film. Robert Sheehan also does a good job. You might know him from Umbrella Academy, but I found his character was hard to sympathise with since he's a thief, and he's also quite wishy-washy as well. It sort of felt like it took a lot to sort of drag him into taking some action in the film. The biggest problem I think with the film is the story. It's kind of weak, and it only really picks up towards the end of the film. It spends a lot of time on Sean, his friends and his family, and trying to establish them and care for them before Cale starts causing problems. But while I felt some sympathy for the people around Sean who did nothing, his thieving made him more problematic, I think, to care for. And sure, Cale is that much worse, and he is substantially worse. He's much easier to dislike. But Sean and Derek were just a sort of a different flavour of awful. Like margarine or Diet Coke. Not as evil, but still bad. At any rate, the story sags for most of the runtime and only really picks up towards the end when Sean is forced into direct confrontation with Cale. It sort of fails to build the necessary tension over its run. Overall, I felt it's sort of a middling thriller. The cast are trying their best, but they don't have much to work with, and it's a little disappointing given that it's got some good actors, and I just think the story maybe needed a little bit more work. It's not terrible, but it's not a must-watch either. If you're a fan of David Tennant, check it out. Okay, next up is Life. It's from 2017, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Rebecca Ferguson and Ryan Reynolds, and it was showing on Prime. So this is about a team of scientists. They're aboard the International Space Station and they discover a rapidly evolving life form that caused extinction on Mars and now threatens the Earth. I think the story must have been inspired by NASA's announcement that they'd found microscopic life in a rock sample from Mars. The scientists in this find a dormant cell and some soil samples from Mars, and they successfully revive it, and it quickly starts to grow and become a multicellular organism with some unusual characteristics. Its cells can take on sort of multiple functions and act as other kinds of cells. It doesn't seem to have the differentiation that we do. The life form becomes hostile though, escapes and quickly grows as it creates chaos on the space station. It quickly becomes sort of another spin, I guess, on the Alien type story, with the creature slowly picking off the crew while they race to stop it. However, unlike Alien, it doesn't have the grungy lived-in world or the nightmare stylings of Geiger. It does look clean and modern though, and the effects are really good. The creature Kelvin is well realised, and I wasn't sure whether it was actually hostile or not though. It may have just been reacting to the way it was being treated and a misunderstanding has occurred, which is entirely plausible. It never felt as openly hostile as the Xenomorph from Alien was. I think the cast do a great job though, and the film doesn't spend a lot of time establishing much about who they are though, which is a bit of a limitation. You really need to care about people when you start to lose them. I do have to give the film credit though for killing off a main name character that wasn't expected at all. It seems to homage Psycho, I think, where the main character who is publicised in the film is killed off early on, and the film then shifts focus to other characters. It also defied expectations with a twist and a possible downer ending, depending whether or not Kelvin is actually hostile. It kind of leaves that open to interpretation. The director since said that he suggests that maybe Kelvin wasn't hostile and has learned to communicate by the end, but who knows? The film doesn't really give you that, I guess. But I had a good time with it. There's some good action sequences, there's some genuine tension. It's worth a look if you're into some sci-fi critter action. Okay, next up is Gringo. It's from 2018, stars Joel Edgerton, Charlize Theron, and David Oyelowo. Apologies if I mangled your name. And it's showing on Prime. So this is about a businessman, Harold Soyinka, played by David, and he finds himself in a fight for his life when he accidentally becomes entangled in a criminal conspiracy in Mexico. Basically, it's a comedy of errors. Nice guy Harold, he becomes tangled up in the schemes of his employer, the Mexican drug cartels, and later the DEA. And he's a nice guy. He's just basically a doormat for everyone around him. And over the course of the film, he's got to wake up and take some control. I guess that's his journey. Problem is there's just a lot of coincidence and stuff just happening around him, and the plot quickly gets very complicated, and there are a lot of characters to keep track of. It's not unwatchable, and there are some occasional laughs, but it's definitely more a crime film than a comedy film. There's also some action sequences and some occasional violence, which is quite jarring, and the violence is sort of very unflinching. There's quite a graphic toe decapitation, which was unexpected. But there are also a lot of very good actors in the cast as well, and they do a good job, I think, with what they've got, but most of them aren't playing likable characters. Many of them are quite despicable, and you can't help feeling that everyone in Mexico is out to screw over Harold, who's sort of largely unsure, I think, of what's going on for a lot of the time. Even Mitch, played by Sharlto Copley, he's supposedly been sent to rescue Harold, and then very quickly switches to trying to kill him when Richard, played by Joel Edgerton, instructs him to get rid of him. Everyone around him is so greedy and irredeemable, and even in the resolution, many of them don't change for the better, they just sort of wriggle free. I suppose it's realistic in that regard, but it doesn't sort of have the traditional arc journey for a lot of the characters that you normally expect in a film. At any rate, it's not a terrible film, it's just kind of messy, and I think that kind of translates into a sort of a middling film. I enjoyed some of it, but it was kind of exhausting trying to keep track of the plot and the characters and what the hell was going on. I don't think it's as terrible as some reviews would leave you to believe, but I don't think that I add it to my list of favourite films or anything like that. Maybe check it out and make up your own mind. Okay, finally today is The Protege. It's from 2021, starring Samuel L. Jackson, Michael Keaton, Maggie Q, and this was on Prime. So, rescued as a child by assassin Moody, played by Samuel L. Jackson, Anna, played by Maggie Q, is now one of the world's most skilled assassins. However, when Moody is brutally killed, she vows revenge for the man who taught her everything she knows. Searching for Moody's killer leads her to cross paths with Rembrandt, played by Michael Keaton, and a cat and mouse game ensues. I thought this was a surprisingly good film. Maggie Q carries the film for most of the film, and there's quite a lot of action. She does a really great job, and it was quite entertaining. Although the story was a little hard to follow, especially when she's tracking down Hayes, a problem from Moody's distant past, who, spoilers, somehow survived. Sam does a great job as usual. But he's not in the movie as much as you'd expect, which was surprising. Michael Keaton is also fun as he pursues Anna, and their verbal sparring adds sort of an unnecessary, I felt, will they, won't they romantic element. I'm not sure what they were trying to do with that, since it never really pans out into anything. He doesn't turn and help her, they don't team up or anything like that, and it just seems weird that there'd be anything other than adversarial. Maybe they were making an attempt at professional courtesy. I enjoyed their interactions though, but I'm just not sure where the story was attempting to go with that. I could see Maggie Q's Anna though returning in sequels as her expert contract killer. The action sequences were fun though, and there was enough of them to keep the film from ever getting boring. There's some good hand-to-hand combat, some good shootouts and things like that. A restrained runtime also helps, and the film doesn't outstay its welcome at any point. The bad guys though are a little generic, being Europeans in black suits driving black Range Rovers, but I feel that's more of an issue with the genre than the film itself. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a competent action thriller. It's got a good cast. They travel the globe trying to unravel a mystery with some good fight sequences and action. And I recommend checking it out. Give it a look. Okay, so those are my suggestions for this week. I hope some of them were of interest to you. As always, if you've got any comments, feel free to leave them below. Click on the like and subscribe so I can let you know when the next set of reviews comes out. And if you've got any suggestions as well, feel free to leave them below. I'm always open to suggestions. And somewhere on screen now will be my Twitter link as well. I often tweet what I'm watching and tweet about what's going on and things like that in things that I'm watching. So if you want to pop up on there and tweet at me, happy to chat. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you're all well. Enjoy some movies and TV, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye now.